Have you ever seen someone lose everything and then within minutes change the game entirely? It started with an 11-year-old girl, a trumpet case, and a first-class seat she was told didn't belong to her. But what happened next, just 7 minutes later, shook an entire airline to its core. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Nalia Thorne stood alone at Gate 43 in the busy terminal of LAX. Her back barely reached the metal railing, and the trumpet case she held with both arms nearly touched the ground. She wore a soft blue dress with a simple hem that danced just above her knees and sneakers that had seen a few too many music rehearsals. The satin scarf wrapped around the trumpet was once her mother's, worn and faded, but always folded neatly, just like her mother used to do. It was a warm afternoon in Los Angeles, though the air conditioning inside the terminal had that steady, humming chill that made people keep their jackets on. Nalia didn't have a jacket. She had a small carry-on in the trumpet, and that was enough. She'd been excited all week. She was headed to the New York Youth Conservatory to play her first solo on stage. The invitation came after months of practice, auditions, and an unexpected email with the subject line, "We are honored to welcome you." Her father, Elias Thorne, was supposed to take her. He'd planned to, but a last-minute executive meeting had pulled him into a boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Australis Tower. He'd kissed her forehead that morning, knelt to her level, and said, "You'll be fine, Nalia. I booked you a first-class seat, not to spoil you, but so you'd know what it feels like to be taken care of." She remembered nodding, trying to act grown up. She was used to moving through spaces on her own. Her father taught her that independence wasn't about being alone. It was about knowing you belonged wherever you stood. The final boarding call echoed overhead. A gate agent called for Group 1. Nalia looked down at her boarding pass again. Seat 1A, first class. She walked forward when her group was called, passport tucked behind the slip of paper like her dad had shown her. She smiled politely, handed over her ticket, and received a nod from the agent who barely glanced at her face. Inside the jet bridge, the air shifted from polished concrete to recycled cabin pressurization. She stepped into the aircraft with a mix of excitement and nervousness. First class wasn't like anything she knew. Cream leather seats, wide armrests, people already sipping drinks that didn't come in plastic cups. She moved carefully, scanning for 1A. She found it by the window. The view was nothing but the wing and sun glare, but it still felt special. She lifted her trumpet case into the overhead bin and sat down. She didn't recline or press any buttons, just folded her hands neatly in her lap like her father taught her. That's when she felt the shadow. "Sweetie," came a voice, low and firm, "I think you're in the wrong section." Nalia turned. A woman stood beside her aisle. Blonde hair tightly pinned, a crisp navy uniform, and a name tag that read, G. Arlo. The woman didn't smile. "No, ma'am," Nalia said gently. "This is my seat. Ake." The woman's eyebrows pulled together. She didn't lean in, didn't ask to see the pass. She just shook her head slightly. "This section is for first-class passengers," she said, slower this time. "Are you flying with someone?" "No, ma'am. My dad booked the ticket. It's a graduation gift." "You're unaccompanied?" Her voice sharpened. She glanced over her shoulder. Nalia, still calm, reached for the boarding pass folded inside her dress pocket. "Yes, but—" "I said," the woman cut in, her tone brisk now, "this seat isn't for unaccompanied minors." She didn't look at the ticket. She didn't ask another question. Instead, she walked briskly toward the front of the cabin and murmured something into the phone near the galley. Within moments, a uniformed crew member appeared, a security officer in a blazer, not a badge. He leaned toward Nalia and said, almost apologetically, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Nalia didn't cry. She stood, adjusted her dress, reached up and carefully took down the trumpet case. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, voice low. "I understand," the man said. "Just come with me for a moment. We'll sort it out." She didn't resist. She just followed, one quiet step after another. A few passengers looked up. One man tilted his head but said nothing. A woman with designer sunglasses whispered to her seatmate. By the time she reached the small glass-walled security room just off the terminal, her plane was already taxiing. She sat in the metal chair. The trumpet case rested on her lap, her arms wrapped tight around it. No one had yelled. No one had shoved her. But somehow it still felt like something had been taken. As the plane doors closed, the seat by the window remained empty, and Nalia sat behind the glass wall of the security office, her trumpet case hugged tight against her chest. Nalia sat on the cold plastic chair, knees pressed together, trumpet case balanced across her lap. Her fingers traced the edge of the latch without thinking. Through the small window, she could see the tail of the plane she was supposed to be on slowly backing away from the gate. It moved with steady, effortless power, while she remained still, silent behind the glass. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she didn't want to. Not yet. The room was too bright, the kind of light that made everything feel more exposed. The walls were off-white, the floor scuffed from too many rolling suitcases. A vending machine in the corner buzzed quietly, as if trying not to disturb the air already thick with things unsaid. She watched the plane inch down the tarmac, then disappear from view. A weight settled in her chest, not just disappointment, but something heavier. A mix of being small, unseen, and somehow wrong in a space where she had every right to be. Her father's words echoed in her mind as if they were tied to that very moment. You don't have to shout to be heard, Nalia. Sometimes dignity is the loudest voice. But sitting here, watched over like she'd done something wrong, she wondered if dignity still meant anything when people didn't even care enough to look you in the eye. A knock at the door broke the quiet. It didn't open yet, just a soft knock, like a warning. Then a man walked in, tall, maybe in his late 30s, with a gray jacket over a collared shirt and a badge clipped to his belt. Not a cop, not quite security. He looked around the room like he didn't want to be there either. He wasn't the one she noticed most. A second person followed. Younger, maybe mid-20s, brown skin, close-cropped hair, eyes that flicked from the corner of the room to her face and stayed there. He wore a navy sport coat and carried a phone already glowing in his palm. Nalia, he said gently, not crouching, not patronizing, just meeting her gaze like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm Callan. Your dad sent me. She blinked, then nodded once. She didn't know him, but his tone was warm without pretending to fix anything. Callan turned to the security officer. What exactly happened here? The older man cleared his throat, avoided eye contact. There was, some confusion. The flight crew thought the child wasn't, well, there was concern she might not have a valid seat assignment. She had a ticket, Callan said flatly. First class, 1A. Elias Thorne booked it himself. A younger agent entered the room quietly. He couldn't have been more than 22, maybe still in training. He placed a paper cup of chocolate milk and 2 wrapped cookies on the table beside Nalia, not saying a word. Then he backed up and disappeared as quickly as he'd come. No apology, no explanation, just snacks and silence. A different man in a gray tie stepped in. A manager, probably. He gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's all a misunderstanding, he said. We hope you understand. Nalia looked up at him, her face calm but her eyes steady. That sentence landed harder than if he'd raised his voice. It wasn't a mistake. It was something else. And now they were asking her to carry the weight of it like it was nothing. Callan's jaw flexed. He let out a slow breath, then sat down in the chair beside her, placing his phone on the table. You ever hear the story about the red hoodie? He asked her. She gave a small shake of her head. I was 15, he said. Went into a store in my neighborhood. Had this old red hoodie my uncle gave me. I walked around for maybe 5 minutes before someone told me to leave. Said I made customers nervous. I didn't say anything. I just left. Didn't even tell my mom. He paused. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't sting as much. Nalia looked at him, her eyes softening. That store's not there anymore, he added, but I remember every aisle and every look I got. They sat in silence for a moment, not heavy, just full. Callan leaned forward and spoke directly toward the small camera in the upper corner of the room. You'll want to forward this tape to Mr. Thorne. Now. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Not a threat, more like a certainty. Then he looked back at Nalia. Your dad's going to fix this, but not just for you. She looked down at her hands again, then quietly picked up the chocolate milk. She didn't sip it, just held it. The warmth of the trumpet against her leg reminded her who she was, where she was supposed to be. And though her seat on the plane was gone, there was something else, something more important, on its way to being reclaimed. Back in the cabin of Flight 2127, Gwen Arlo moved with mechanical grace. Her tray of drinks shifted slightly as she stepped down the narrow aisle, stopping to offer tea to a man in a navy blazer who was halfway through a crossword. She didn't look shaken. If anything, she looked settled. Too settled. A young woman in row 2A leaned toward her travel partner and whispered, "Wasn't there a little girl sitting there earlier?" The man nodded slowly. "Seat 1A, I think." As if hearing the comment, Gwen glanced their way, offered a bland smile and said, "Administrative mix-up. These things happen." She turned back down the aisle before either of them could ask another question. At the front of the cabin, a junior flight attendant, barely in her 20s, stood frozen behind the curtain, one hand gripping the edge. She'd watched the whole thing unfold earlier, but hadn't dared speak up. Now, as Gwen passed, she tried to hold her gaze, but Gwen didn't look at her. Still, her face betrayed something flickering just behind her calm expression. It was hard to say if it was doubt, guilt, or simply the weight of what had been done. Across town, inside the glass and steel tower Elias Thorne had helped build from the ground up, a boardroom sat hushed. 8 partners lined both sides of a long walnut table. A map of Eastern Europe was projected on the wall. Potential expansion targets circled in blue. Elias didn't look at the map. He didn't touch his coffee. Callan entered without knocking. He didn't carry a folder or a file, only an iPad gripped tightly in one hand. The room, used to quiet deference, turned toward him in silent curiosity. Callan placed the iPad in front of Elias, tapped the screen once, and stepped back. The footage began playing with no sound. Security cam footage from LAX, Elia boarding, sitting down, Gwen approaching. The moment her hand lifted, dismissing the ticket without a glance. The arrival of security, the trumpet case, Elia standing, quiet, compliant, while everyone watched. Elias didn't blink. His fingers laced together, then tightened slightly until his knuckles turned pale. When the footage ended, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector fan overhead. "When did this happen?" Elias asked. 7 minutes ago, Callan replied. Elias stood, buttoning his jacket with quiet precision. "We're done here," he said. "I need the executive board of Starlight Air. Now." There was no anger in his voice, only decision. Back at the airport, Elia remained in the same chair. Her posture hadn't changed much, though her hands now rested more firmly on her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't lean back. Her trumpet was still safe across her legs, as if its weight helped her stay anchored. The door opened softly. Callan re-entered, walking slowly this time. He sat beside her and held out a phone. Its screen lit up with a name she recognized instantly. Dad. The phone vibrated once more. She didn't reach for it immediately. Her fingers hovered, then curled back. Callan didn't rush her. He simply held it a moment longer. She finally took it, lifting it to her ear without a word. Elias's voice came through, low, heavy. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" She hesitated. The silence on her end said more than any words might. "I thought," she began, her voice barely audible. "Being good was enough." Elias closed his eyes on the other end. The line was silent for just a second or two, but it felt full, thick with things a father doesn't want to hear from his child. "You were good," he said. "They were not." It wasn't a comfort. It wasn't meant to be. It was truth. Elias ended the call gently, then stepped out of the conference room and made his way to the private elevator. A black SUV waited at the curb downstairs. He climbed in, gave a single nod to the driver, and settled into the back seat. The car rolled forward. Still holding the phone, Elias murmured, "Stay where you are. Don't say anything. Don't explain. I'll handle it." As the vehicle turned onto the main road, the console screen on the dashboard lit up. A secure message appeared. "Emergency boardroom session in progress. Majority shareholders online." Elias tapped the screen once, dismissed the message, then looked out the window. The city passed by, buildings tall and indifferent. His reflection stared back at him. He wasn't just a father now. He was a man about to shift the direction of a company, and maybe something more. Not because he wanted revenge, because sometimes when dignity isn't enough, power has to speak. Inside a windowless meeting room tucked into a quiet wing of the terminal, the temporary command center for Starlight Air was tense but composed. The hum of distant airport announcements bled faintly through the walls. On a large monitor mounted to the front of the room, half a dozen Zoom windows flickered with the faces of high-ranking executives, some in home offices, some in boardrooms, all sharply dressed, watching Elias Thorne with narrowed eyes. Elias didn't sit. He stood at the head of the room, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, just enough to show he wasn't here to perform. The iPad on the table in front of him displayed a paused video. Grainy airport footage caught from above. He tapped it, and it played. The scene was quiet but damning. Gwen Arlo's hand waving off the ticket, the quiet tension, the arrival of security, and Nalia rising to her feet, trumpet case clutched tight, walking out without protest. Then Elias tapped again. Another clip rolled. Different airport, different passenger, same pattern, a young man escorted out of a boarding area without cause. A third video, an older woman in a headscarf being questioned, then turned away despite a valid pass. By the fourth, no one on the Zoom call was speaking. Most weren't even blinking. Elias took a breath. Calm, controlled. You don't just have a PR problem, he said. You have a system that punishes people who look like my daughter. Silence. He laid a document flat on the table. I currently hold 31.8% of voting shares. That's enough to convene a special board session and influence policy. Starting today. A few faces on the screen shifted. One leaned forward. Another muted themselves. But I'm not here to make noise, Elias continued. I'm here to make it stop. Across the terminal, Callan returned to the security room with a tall man in a sleek blazer. The manager's posture was tight, his hands gripping a clipboard like it held the key to his career. We'd like to offer your daughter access to the VIP lounge, the manager said gently. It's a courtesy, a personal request from the airline. Nalia didn't look up right away. She had been quietly tapping her fingers against the edge of the trumpet case, eyes following the same scuff on the linoleum floor over and over. Then she turned to Callan. Is this because they're scared of Dad now? Callan hesitated. They're trying to do what's right. She tilted her head slightly, gaze still even. Because if they only respect people who have power, then nothing has changed. The room went still for a beat. Callan looked at the manager. She'll go back to her original seat. The man opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He nodded once and stepped aside. Back in the makeshift boardroom, Elias was wrapping up. I'm not demanding apologies. I'm demanding accountability. If this company is going to keep carrying passengers, it's going to start carrying responsibility too. From another room nearby, Gwen Arlo stood alone in front of a second screen. She had been asked to join the internal session, a requirement before a formal review. The screen displayed the same footage Elias had shown. She watched herself, brisk, impatient, dismissive. It didn't feel like watching someone else. It felt worse. It felt familiar. Her mouth parted slightly as the video showed Nalia standing up, silent, not even confused, just resigned. A voice from the monitor asked, "Why didn't you check the boarding pass?" Gwen's hands tensed at her sides. "I just assumed," she said. She was alone. She was young. She looked. She stopped. Her voice failed. The sentence hung in the air like a stain no one could scrub out. In the corridor between gates, Nalia walked beside Callan. Her trumpet case swung lightly in her hand. The terminal was quieter now. Late afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows on the tile floor. As they reached the gate, a voice called from behind. "You forgot this." A young staffer jogged up, holding a small folded scarf, her mother's scarf. He looked maybe 21, nervous and earnest. "It looked like it mattered," he said, placing it gently in her hand. Nalia held it for a second, then wrapped it around the trumpet case again, fingers folding the corners just the way her mother used to. The gate agent nodded to her as she approached. This time, no one asked questions. No one blocked the way. She stepped back onto the plane, into the cool, filtered air of the cabin. The seat was there, 1A near the window, still empty, still waiting. She didn't look around. She didn't search the faces of those already seated. She looked at the seat, still warm, still hers. The sun had long dipped below the skyline, and the city lights shimmered against the towering glass windows of Estrella's Tower. Inside one of its top floors, the executive suite was quiet. Elias Thorne sat alone at a long conference table, the room dim except for the glow of a single overhead fixture. His jacket lay folded over the back of his chair. A digital tablet rested in front of him, its screen displaying the transfer contract that would give him controlling interest in Starlight Air. Just a signature away. He didn't reach for the pen. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced together like he was holding something fragile. In that stillness, he wasn't the billionaire investor or boardroom strategist. He was just a father, one who couldn't shake the image of his daughter sitting alone behind a glass wall, holding a trumpet instead of a voice. He whispered to no one, "If I buy this company just to fix what happened to Nalaya, will they believe I did it for every kid like her?" The room offered no answer, only silence and reflection, both literal and emotional, shimmered off the polished glass surface beneath his arms. His phone buzzed. A new message from Callan. Attached was a scanned document, an internal report from 6 months prior. Gwen Arlo's name was on it. So were two others. Incident summaries. Complaints. Passenger denied boarding. Refused to verify ticket. Behavior noted as dismissive and biased. Each time, no formal reprimand had been issued. Each time, supervisors had noted her long tenure and otherwise strong performance. Elias exhaled slowly, his shoulders squaring with resolve. The problem wasn't Gwen. It was the culture that protected her. He picked up the phone and called his legal team. "Get the PR group on standby," he said. "We're going public. Tonight. Prepare the statement and tell them this isn't about payback. This is about principle." 45 minutes later, every domestic flight under the Starlight Air banner was grounded. The company issued a rare system-wide pause, citing an immediate internal policy review. It wasn't a delay due to weather or maintenance. It was something else, something people noticed. By morning, headlines were everywhere. Thorne freezes airline operations over racial discrimination allegations. Executive action. Flights halted after black child removed from first class. Thorne Holdings steps in after viral airport incident sparks outrage. The public response wasn't subtle. Thousands of shares, posts, and reshares. The video footage, hashtags, debates. And in the middle of it all, a photograph. A little girl in a blue dress, trumpet case across her knees, eyes steady as stone, behind a pane of airport glass. But even as the world reacted, Nalaya was quiet again. This time back in Seat 1A. The cabin lights were soft now. Passengers settled in. A different flight attendant worked the aisle. A young woman with warm eyes and cinnamon-colored skin. She bent down beside Nalaya's seat, not hurried, not scripted. "Good evening, Miss Thorne," she said gently. "Would you like some juice before we take off?" Nalaya looked up, nodded once. "Yes, please, apple, if you have it." The woman smiled. "Coming right up." As she walked away, Nalaya leaned toward the window. Her reflection was faint in the dim light, and behind it, the blurred movement of airport trucks and blinking runway lights. She opened her small leather notebook, dog-eared, filled with penciled staves and half-finished songs, and jotted down a few notes, humming under her breath. A quiet melody took shape. Something slow but not sad. It was the first time she'd smiled in hours. Across the country, in a late-night press conference streamed to thousands, Elias stood in front of a podium with the Starlight Air logo behind him. He wore no tie, no prepared speech in hand. Just a tired but determined expression. "My daughter's seat," he said, "was never about luxury. It was about belonging." He paused. "And today we take the first step to ensure that every passenger, no matter their age, color, or clothing, feels like they belong here too." Reporters began shouting questions as he stepped away from the mic. He didn't stop. His phone was already in his hand. He pressed it to his ear just as a soft sound carried through the line. Thin, almost wobbly at first, then stronger. It was a trumpet. It was blues. From somewhere near Gate 43, in the back of that late-night flight, a young girl played alone. No spotlight, no stage, just breath, brass, and memory. Elias smiled, not wide but deep, quiet pride settling in his chest. Not everything had been fixed, but something had begun. The early hours of dawn brought no pause inside the executive floor of Starlight Air's temporary command center. While most of the airport outside still slept in dimmed terminal lights and silent moving walkways, inside this room, a different kind of movement stirred. Elias Thorne sat at the head of a polished round table, eyes clear, voice steady, and purpose sharpened. "I won't just fix the seat my daughter lost," he said to the room. "I'll fix the silence that let it happen." Across from him, the company's legal advisor looked up from a thick folder of policy documents. Around the table, a dozen faces nodded, though not all in agreement. The tension was thick, not chaotic, but tight, like a cord stretched to its limits. "We've identified 5 middle managers," said a compliance officer. "Each ignored or quietly dismissed complaints tied to Gwen Arlo or similar behavior. Some multiple times." Elias didn't flinch. "They're done. Today." Gasps weren't audible, but a few eyes widened. A younger executive leaned forward. "We'll need just cause language, severance structure, media strategy." "Write it," Elias cut in. "We'll issue a statement. They're leaving not just for what they ignored, but for what they enabled." He flipped to the next page of a proposal drafted overnight. "We're also launching a permanent passenger feedback system. Anonymous, accessible, protected. It's called Voice of the Passenger. It goes live next month." Someone toward the back of the room hesitated before speaking. "That's a lot of change all at once." Elias didn't hesitate. "That's the point." Down the hall, a second boardroom filled with quieter voices. Some of the company's longest-standing shareholders, many of them older men in suits as gray as the carpet beneath them, voiced their discomfort. "You're risking stability over a single incident," one man argued. "It's not just an incident, it's emotion. You can't run a business based on your feelings, Elias." Elias, who joined them to deliver the news personally, stood near the door. He paused, then stepped forward, meeting each gaze head-on. "This isn't about feelings," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is about who we choose to be when no one's watching." He didn't wait for applause or reaction. He simply left the room, and with the voting power in his hands, the decision held. In the minutes after, Callan found himself summoned to a smaller room upstairs. The same man who had doubted Elias earlier now sat with a new proposition. "You've handled this storm well," he said to Callan. "We'd like you to consider taking on the role of Director of Communications. We need someone who understands the optics, but more importantly, the heart of this." Callan hesitated. His hands rested on his thighs, and he thought back to the long day behind him. The video, the press, the flight that never carried Nalia, and her face when she asked the hardest question. Is this just because they're scared of Dad now? He knew then what his answer had to be. "If I can help make sure no kid ever asks that question again," he said, "I'll do it." Somewhere else in the building, in a small HR office that felt more like a forgotten corner than part of a global company, Gwen Arlo sat quietly across from a woman in a navy skirt suit. The HR representative, flanked by a company lawyer, spoke without judgment. "You're not facing criminal charges. There will be no police report, but you'll no longer be eligible for employment in commercial aviation." Gwen stared at the desk for a long time. Her hands were folded, but her knuckles were white. "Did she ever cry?" she asked, her voice dry, uncertain. The lawyer didn't respond. Gwen nodded slowly, lowering her eyes again. "That's what I thought." No one yelled, no one scolded. But in that moment, Gwen began to understand. This wasn't just about what she'd done, but what she never stopped to consider. The indifference, the assumption. It was the kind of thing that creeps in quiet and stays. And it cost her everything. Back on board Flight 2127, the sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon. Soft amber light spilled across the clouds outside the window. Nalia sat still, trumpet by her side, notebook open on her tray table, halfway through a doodled melody line. The same kind flight attendant returned, crouching gently beside her. "The captain asked me to give you this." It was a folded note, handwritten on a square of official paper. Nalia unfolded it slowly, lips parting slightly as she read. Seat 1A was never just a number. Thanks for reminding us what it really means. Captain M. Rivera. She read it again, then folded it carefully, slipping it into the back of her notebook like a pressed flower. And for the first time since the beginning of this long, confusing journey, she didn't just feel seen, she felt heard. The wheels touched down just after noon, the smooth rumble of the landing gear barely pulling Nalaya from her light sleep. She sat up straighter, blinking against the cabin light as the seatbelt sign dinged off. The trumpet case still rested beside her, one hand draped across it even in rest. At gate 17 of JFK, the jet bridge door opened slowly, and the first passengers began stepping off into the hum of New York air. Nalaya followed, quiet among the shuffle of business shoes and vacation sandals, walking with small, measured steps. Near the terminal exit, a cluster of people had gathered. Journalists, maybe a dozen at most, their voices low but eager, cameras already raised. Before any could approach, two security personnel stepped forward, holding them back with calm hands and a quiet, "Please let her through." Behind them stood a woman in a slate gray pantsuit, her arms open. She was from the New York Youth Conservatory, and her voice was warm as she leaned forward to hug Nalaya gently. "You made it, Miss Thorne," she whispered, "and you brought more than just your trumpet." Nalaya smiled softly but didn't speak. Her fingers held a little tighter to the instrument case as they led her out of the terminal and into the city. Hours later, Elias Thorne arrived at JFK. His flight had left just after the press conference the night before, and he'd worked most of the way there, scrolling through statements, emails, and a storm of press coverage that hadn't let up. He'd changed clothes mid-air and now looked composed but weary, suit crisp but eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He wasn't expected for another hour, so he asked for a quiet lounge. The staff, recognizing the name, obliged without hesitation. When he entered the small room tucked behind a row of glass doors, he stopped short. Gwen Arlo was there, standing at a narrow counter, folding her airline ID into a padded envelope. Her suitcase was zipped, her badge already removed from her collar. She turned when she heard the door. There was no drama in the moment, only quiet tension. Gwen's face flushed. Her voice, when it came, was thin and steady. "I suppose I deserved it." Elias nodded once, but his voice stayed low. "I'm not here to punish you." She looked at him, startled for a second. "You could," she said, "and no one would stop you." "I'm not interested in that," Elias said, "because this wasn't just about what you did to Nalaya. It's about what the silence in this company taught you was okay." She looked away. Her shoulders sagged, just a little. Elias didn't say more. He didn't have to. He left the room with nothing more than a nod, leaving behind a woman who was finally starting to hear the weight of what had never been said out loud. That evening, at the New York Youth Conservatory, the auditorium lights dimmed, and a quiet hush fell over the crowd. Parents, teachers, donors, and young musicians filled the rows, all waiting for the next performance. Nalaya stepped out from stage right with three other players, trumpet in hand, hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She wore a new dress, navy with silver trim, just long enough to sway softly when she moved. No announcement came before her, no explanation. Just a girl and her horn. They began a slow blues standard, but Nalaya's arrangement had added a moment of silence near the middle, a stretch of time where the music paused, hung in the air, like a breath not taken. It felt like the gap between being invited and being told you don't belong. And then, with a sharp inhale, she lifted the trumpet and played again, strong, confident, with no hint of hesitation. In the front row, Elias sat still, his hands clasped in his lap, his glasses slightly fogged. Callan sat beside him, not speaking, only watching with the quiet pride of someone who had helped a moment like this happen. When the final note faded, no one clapped immediately. It was as though no one wanted to break the stillness. Then a single clap came, from the back, and then another. Soon the entire room was on their feet, the applause not loud but deep, steady, real. After the performance, a local reporter asked if Nalaya would speak. She hesitated but nodded once. She stepped back onto the stage, took the microphone from its stand, and looked out across the crowd. "I didn't come here to tell a story about being wronged," she said. "I came to play music." She paused. "But if my seat for a few hours made someone uncomfortable. Maybe it's because too many of us aren't used to seeing kids like me sit there. There were no questions after that, only the hush of people realizing the depth behind a quiet voice. As she stepped off stage, a young girl ran up to her, maybe 9 or 10, freckles across her nose, blonde curls bouncing. "You were brave," the girl said, hugging her tight. "I want to be like that." Later that night, in his new office overlooking the East River, Elias stood alone. On the wall behind his desk, framed in simple black wood, was a black and white print from a security camera. It showed Elias sitting in a hard plastic chair, trumpet in her lap, eyes looking straight ahead. Beneath the photo, in Elias's own handwriting, were the words, "Never let this become normal." Weeks had passed since the night Elia played at the conservatory. New York had already shifted toward its colder season. Air crisper, mornings earlier, coats thicker. But inside the quiet calm of her room, a different kind of warmth lingered. Nalia sat cross-legged on her bed, trumpet case open beside her, notebook resting against her knees. She flipped through pages filled with scribbled melodies, half-songs, and reflections written between staves. On the final page, in soft pencil, she wrote, "Music doesn't fix the world, but it tells the truth gently." She stared at the sentence for a moment, then reached toward the wall above her desk and pinned up a photo, a small print of Seat 1A from Starlight Air. The armrest was slightly worn, the leather smooth, but it wasn't the seat itself that mattered, it was what it came to mean. That same week, across homes and inboxes, a letter arrived to millions of Starlight passengers. "We are more than a company, we are a journey, and every journey should begin with dignity." At the bottom was a signature, clean, blue ink against white. Elias Thorne, Executive Chairman. It was brief, not overly polished, not dramatic, but it landed with the quiet gravity of something earned. Elsewhere in the city, Gwen Arlo stood in line at a modest workforce development center. No badge, no blazer, just a simple gray sweater, a manila envelope in hand, and tired eyes. The room smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. On the wall, flyers advertised GED prep, resume workshops, local job fairs. When her number was called, she sat across from a counselor no older than her own niece. "Employment history?" the woman asked kindly. Gwen took a deep breath. "I used to work in air travel, but I made a mistake, a big one." She looked up. "But I'm learning." The counselor nodded slowly, then slid a folder toward her. "There are programs for community work. Some of them deal with kids, public services, accessibility, places where new perspectives really matter." Gwen didn't say anything, but when she walked out the door and into the breeze, there was something softer in her steps. Redemption didn't come with applause, but there was room to begin again. At Starlight Air, change wasn't just corporate language anymore. A new program, Perspective Training, rolled out across departments, aimed at helping staff recognize unconscious bias and practice active inclusivity. For many, it was the first time they'd ever been invited to speak about these things. For some, it was the first time they'd ever listened. One local news anchor opened his segment with quiet pride. "Passengers once silenced are now part of the voices shaping change. From silence comes a new kind of service." The camera cut to Callan Bright standing in front of a whiteboard, gesturing to a circle of trainees. "Inclusion isn't a department," he said. "It's a habit." He didn't preach. He shared. About his own story, his own silence once mistaken for acceptance, and about one small girl who sat in a big seat and reminded an entire industry what it had forgotten. Meanwhile, ordinary life went on, but it didn't feel quite the same. One crisp Saturday, Elias and Elia walked into a corner cafe just down from their old neighborhood. Years ago, they'd stopped there once and left quickly, waited too long to order, were served too cold, were watched too closely. But now the same bell rang over the door, and when they stepped inside, a young man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Good morning. Table for two?" Elias nodded. "Yes, thank you." They were shown to a seat near the window. No stares, no questions, just coffee and sunlight. "So," Elias said, stirring his drink, You want to keep the trumpet? Or maybe try piano next? Nalia smiled into her cocoa. Let's see how many doors I can open with just one seat first. They both laughed, not loudly, but with the ease of something shared and real. And far away, back at LAX, a quiet change had been made. Inside Gate 43's boarding lounge, on the wall above a row of departure photos, a single plaque had been mounted. Just above it, a first-class seat had been preserved, its arms sealed in glass, cushion untouched. The plaque read, "In honor of the journey that changed us." There was no name, no logo, just a seat. But every flight attendant in the company knew the story, and if you asked any of them, they would say the same thing. That seat belongs to anyone brave enough to claim their place. And in that still space between arrival and departure, something unseen but powerful remained. A truth, a reminder, a promise. So maybe the real question isn't just about who gets a seat in first class, but who we quietly believe doesn't. Sometimes it takes one small act of dignity to reveal the cracks in a much bigger system. And when courage meets compassion, change doesn't just happen, it ripples. What do you think makes someone truly belong? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more stories that matter. Stories that challenge, connect, and inspire.